Just happy accidents. You can do anything that you want to do. Sing along, have a good time.
Welcome to Error451, an occasionally weekly podcast on tech security from an anarchist perspective. I'm your host, Burst, so goodness. Hey, we're back again with William Buddington, who is a digital security expert and trainer.
Little snippets, little snacks for the listeners.
Hacks for snacks.
Hacks for snacks. So we recently talked about Cambridge Analytica on Facebook, and a lot of the conversations that we've been having have been concerning personal data and breaches of that or misuse of it by corporations or the collecting of it without our knowledge. But another bump on the information superhighway concerning accessing people's private and personal data was the recently passed Cloud Act, or the Clarifying Overseas Use of Data Act. Can you please tell listeners about what this act was and what it changes?
Yeah, you're clarifying the lawful overseas use of data. But they also have to add something like lawful to a piece of legislation to make it sound super official,
Well, it would have been the Cowed Act before that, and I left the L.
Yeah, you could see some congressional staffer being really tortured to create this acronym. Yeah, so this was tagged on to a 2,232 page appropriations bill. And that's awful because what happened was that this was, a government spending bill, and this has nothing to do with appropriations at all. This was, at the very end of this appropriations bill, it was basically given over to put on, the day before this came out. It was, there wasn't any real ability for them to read over this entire this enormous document, and it was rushed through both houses of Congress. And so, for instance, the House of Representatives voted on it. It was 256 to 167 on March 22nd, and it was 65 to 32, and it was signed into law by Trump on March 23rd. And, having it tagged on to a huge bill is a good way to basically ensure that it doesn't see the light of day or get any scrutiny or debate, because it's actually anyway, unless there's, someone that's very careful and wants to raise a whole bunch of issues with it at the very day when the entire year's kind of fiscal spending bill is put before. So it's really a scary piece of legislation because it allows U.S. and foreign police to have new mechanisms to seize data across the globe. This comes from a case where Microsoft refuses to hand over data in an Irish jurisdiction. Is kind of known for hosting a lot of the data for large tech companies because there are tax breaks in Ireland for corporations that are hosting data there. And so, Ireland is known for this kind of role in the technology scape for having the data in the EU hosted there. Facebook also does this. Microsoft had data about someone that U.S. law enforcement wanted to get at, and Microsoft refused to hand over this data. And so the powers that be basically bill into law very quickly without any level of scrutiny or debate. Now, this kind of, as I said, allows U.S. law enforcement to have new mechanisms to seize data in jurisdictions, across the world, and it also allows foreign nations to demand personal data in the U.S. without judges' approval. There's been some debate over whether the Cloud Act is actually a violation of in law, which is about to take effect. I mentioned this law before, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is set to be enacted or put into place on May 1st. And so basically gives everyone in the EU control over their own data, even when it's stored in the US. And so Europe is trying to protect its own users' data. And on the other side, it's also trying to enact another directive called e-evidence that basically forces U.S. corporations to appoint legal representatives in the EU who can be served with papers in criminal and terrorism investigations. So they're trying to, on the one side, protect users' data, and then the other side kind of enact their own act, which I think that this basically means that of law enforcement on both sides of the Atlantic, their reach can basically seize data in Europe, and in the U.S. can seize data across the globe if we enter into agreements with with the countries, and they can also, in Europe, they can reach over the Atlantic and get at U.S. user data for European cops. So I reach longer on both sides, and so that's a new kind of dimension to think about. One thing is that, and I said that this makes the this is basically enacted or in place for countries that the U.S. has an agreement with, and the executive branch is able to kind of unilaterally make a decision of who it wants to partner with, what countries. It has to be approved by the Attorney General and one other MD and the President, and then it can simply it doesn't require any congressional approval at all or anything like that. So not that would kind of mean anything, but it means that the executive branch can actually just unilaterally say, hey, yeah, we have an agreement with Indonesia, and so that's really frightening, because then Indonesia could get at U.S. data, and we can get at their data that's hosted in there. Cloud Act is basically an attempt to update enforcement mechanisms in the age of cloud computing, where data is stored elsewhere, not just in the U.S. It does a really scary job at actually doing that. Makes it so that who's the loser in the situation? It's the citizens on both sides that are able to have their data accessed by law enforcement in countries that we don't know about, or don't never consented to. Not that we consented to being governed by the U.S. either, but really makes this scary situation where it's being able to get at more of our data, and U.S. cops being able to get at foreign users' data.
Yeah, and I don't think that you mentioned it, but the EFF and other groups were arguing before this actually came up for a vote that it was clearly, and the ACLU also actually clearly contradicts the Fourth Amendment, and the right to protection from unlawful search
and seizure.
The closest thing that we have, the closest thing that we have on the books about a right to privacy in the United States. So well, are there, if this is at the moment out of the hands of people who could apply pressure in the United States, if it's already passed, are there any approaches to data storage that might be more shielded from the effects of the Cloud Act? Should people be, I don't know. Stronger reliance on encryption?
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah.
Hey!
Yes.
I win!
So when people, for instance, with Facebook, you can't really do that, right? If you like something, then Facebook has access to that data, and there's nothing that you can do to encrypt a like on Facebook. But there are things you can do to encrypt the data that you share with others. Say, like, if you wanted to share files with others, instead of using Dropbox or iCloud or Google Cloud Storage, you can use something that encrypts that data first before it ever gets sent up to the cloud. And these are applications which have this property. The property is called zero knowledge in the data storage industry. This means that basically, as I said, is encrypted with a key that's stored locally on your own machine before it's sent up to the servers that you're using. And that means that the services that you're using will not be able to, even under the power of subpoena, get at that information to reveal what is being stored there. All the larger cloud storage applications do not have this as an option. And you can kind of see why, because if you lose that key on your computer, then you can't actually get at your data. You lose the access to that data because the only authentication mechanism that you have is stored locally on your own machine. So it's really important that you make sure that you don't key for your data, or you share it with someone else who also has a backup of that data, etc. But the cloud storage providers want to provide this feature which allows them to restore your access as something that most people want. If you're storing sensitive data, then you really want to look at some other types of applications. And so, for instance, there's something called spider oak. And so that's like spider, like the crawly thing, and then oak, like an oak tree. And basically that's all one word. And you download this application and you install it, and then you have the same encryption happening locally before it's ever sent to Spider Oak. And that means that they can access this data when you upload it to them. There's also another one called Trezor It. It's a little bit more expensive. All these are kind of paid services. Some of them have free trials at the beginning of it. So that's something to keep in mind. There's other ones too. Keybase has their own application, like a key, like a locking key, base, like a base of operations. So Keybase is another application that you can download, and it'll allow you to share files with your friends in an encrypted manner, in a way that they themselves can't gain access to. And if you look up on Wikipedia for backup services and which services offer zero knowledge and which don't. So one thing to keep in mind is that drop all that Dropbox and Google Cloud services and iCloud, and use something else. Use something that actually protects your data.
William, thank you so much for taking the time to chat about this.
All right. Yeah, thanks for
If you'd like to hear more of these chats or our weekly radio show on anarchist actions and ideas, check out thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org.
Hack the planet! Hack the planet!
Shut up and get in the car!
Hack the planet! Hack the planet!